Well, we may be in the lockdown, but proceedings are still going on, or maybe some proceedings are not going on as much as they should be. Joining us is Barry Murphy. Barry, this is with the gas unit and your supporters group together here. What is the situation? I know you've just told me off air that you've got 12 points you want to mention, so clearly things are not moving ahead.
They're not really, Paul. No, silence is deafening at the minute, really. So what I've had to try to do really in my sort of spare time is to try to work out exactly what the other two parties are doing. And as you know, them two parties are Manx Gas and the Isle of Man government. So I'm going to, as I say, I've got 12 points. And I think the easiest way to do is to kind of maybe talk about a little bit very briefly about who I am, what I do, and then sort of move it forward. So the first thing is our Facebook group has been running since 2016. And basically, we've been fighting for fairness since then for gas consumers, and that's what we continue to do, and we'll continue to do until this is brought to some sort of a good solution for everyone, fair solution for us, for the government, and for Manx Gas. That's all we've ever asked for since day one. So, in November 2020, the heads of terms for a 6-year voluntary agreement were agreed at Tynwald. They were voted in favour. As opposed to the other idea, which was to impose regulation on Manx Gas. So Tynwald agreed that the best way forward with this was to agree to another voluntary agreement, which would be a 6-year deal, backdated for 1 year. So backdated to the 1st of January 2020. Now, what we do know is that a day or two before that, a letter had been sent out by Manx Gas to certainly all domestic customers. I don't know if business customers were included into that. But, and it was basically saying that if the government agreed to go down the voluntary route, that customers would get a rebate / refund for 2020 and 2021. What was unclear is what would happen 2022 and onwards. Still very unclear, to be perfectly honest with you. But that's what Tynwald decided they would do. They decided they would go down the voluntary route. Again, they agreed to the heads of terms. Now, that was actually annoying in itself because in October of 2020, I had a petition handed into Tynwald, which was laid in front of all Tynwald members. We had approximately 1,210, I think it was. No, sorry, 2,110 members and gas customers signed that petition. To request that the government goes down the imposed regulation route. Clearly, that was ignored. Once again, democracy failed. So what we do know since then, there's been very, very little communication from either side. So we're now middle of January. The last big discussion on this was in the November Tynwald. So we've gone nearly 2 months onwards, 8 weeks. 8 weeks is a very long time when you've got people waiting on refunds and rebates, because that was the carrot that was dangled at the time. And as far as I'm concerned, and as far as many other gas customers are concerned, something should have been paid out by now, but clearly it hasn't been. So what do we know has happened since then, Paul? So what we do know is, and if you want to stop me, please stop me, but all I can do is try to tell you what I know. So since then, the Communication Commission have become the Communications and Utilities Regulatory Authority. So it has been agreed that there will be a regulator in the future. That is what used to be the Communications Commission, and now they're basically going to become a communications regulator and also a utilities regulator. And from what I understand, please don't hold me down on this one, but from what I understand, currently that will start with Manx Gas and then will be rolled out across possibly other utilities in the future. That's how I understand of it. I've got to, as well at this point, say thank you to Mr. Ivan Kiley, who's the chief executive of the Communication Commission, Communication Utilities Regulatory Authority. I actually had a meeting set up with Ivan in January, but unfortunately I had an accident which has resulted in me not being very well since, and I've had to cancel that. And unfortunately, on top of that, then COVID restrictions have come into place, so it makes everything much more difficult. But in actual fact, what I've decided is it's actually probably better for us really that we hold back on that, because we actually have to wait to see what happens in Tynwald at the Keys at the end of this month. So I've actually, from a negative there, I'm actually turning that into a positive. I think it's better we wait because I think more stuff has to be made clear first. So what else do we know? So we know that the Gas Regulation Act 1995 is currently under scrutiny, and what we also realise is that it's not up to the job of it's not modern enough, if you like. It's for the future. So the government at Tynwald and the Keys have been, from what I understand, have been scrutinising this new bill called the Gas Regulation Bill 2020. And the idea of the Gas Regulation Bill 2020 is to set parameters within which a public gas supplier may fix tariffs and for connection purposes. So dismissing the connection purposes bit, it's to do with how the government, how Manx Gas, and how the regulator in the future will set tariffs for customers. I think it's probably fair to say that there's at least 2 or 3 different types of customers. There's the domestic customers, the business customers, and there's the government itself, which seems to be the best and favourable customer of all because they only pay 2.1p, it seems, per kilowatt hour unit. But we shall talk about that in a little bit as well. So once they work out what they're going to do with this bill, this has to keep coming back and forward on the discussion. Eventually, I guess that bill will then form part of the Gas Regulation Act 1995. So 2 become 1. And at that point forward, I guess from a regulation perspective, that's then when the Communication Commission, with its new title, becomes more powerful. But there's a problem, as there always is, because all of that sounds wonderful, but unfortunately isn't. Section 3, subsection 3 of the Gas Regulation Bill is causing concern for me and other members within our group, and I think it's also starting to cause problems for the MHKs as well, and for all Tynwald members, because what it effectively could do, and I hope everyone can keep up with this, is that if or possibly when another voluntary agreement is signed, if a voluntary agreement is signed, it could effectively take away all powers of the regulator with regards pricing. So many of us are very concerned now that there's absolutely no point whatsoever in putting a new regulator in place if that regulator has no powers. Because a lot of what we've been fighting for is a regulator, but also a regulator with some teeth, because clearly we many of us think that the OFT has possibly not had enough of powers over the last 5 years. So that's going to come up for immense discussion. And I would hope that all members of our group become aware of the fact that this gas regulation bill needs to be scrutinised. And if this subsection 3 is allowed to go through in its current form, it's very clear that maybe gas consumers, certainly the domestic ones, are going to get a very, very bad deal. And that's a real concern. So moving on from all of that, that's where we are. So we know that the Keys are going to meet virtually at the end of this month, and I'm also very aware that MHK Chris Thomas, who's been very, very involved in all of this, and we thank him sincerely for doing that, has got some very, very strong, searching, powerful questions to ask of various different members of the Keys. Sadly, virtually, because it's going to be a virtual sitting. I hope that doesn't take away from the importance of it all, but it's going to be a Keys well worth watching for domestic customers. These questions won't be made public until Thursday lunchtime, so I'm not going to disclose what any of these questions are. I have a good idea what they are, but if people are prepared to wait another 48 hours, then everyone will see what they are. I will say that democracy has completely failed on this subject now. I mean, me and you, Paul, have been doing interviews on this for going on nearly 5 years now. There's absolutely no reason why we should be doing this 4 or 5 years later. And I sincerely hope at this stage that the governor is actually watching this, that the governor watches some of your interviews, because the fact that me and you are chatting today it's unacceptable. Democracy has completely failed. And dare I say it, many politicians who are sitting in the Keys and are sitting in Tynwald have actually failed on this matter as well.
Right, let me come in there because I don't know how many points you've gone through there, but that's quite a sweeping statement. I mean, I've never heard you go this far before, and you're quite a moderate person. You must be at the end of your tether by the sounds of this one now. And who are you laying the blame fairly and squarely on, if anyone particular?
I have a real concern, and I shouldn't say it, but at this point in time, Paul, there's no point in me not coming clean about all my concerns. When the NERA report was made public, 2017, 2018, I think it was, the NERA report was a very, very good report for gas consumers. But one thing the NERA report never touched on was that the government, with some, most, or possibly all of its 135 accounts, that MHK Chris Robertshaw disclosed when he done an interview with you last year, when he disclosed that the government were paying, in some instances, 2.1 pence per kilowatt hour for gas, which was in many cases quite below the operational cost of what Manx Gas conducts its business at. That is a disgrace, Paul. I mean, Chris Robertshaw that day used them words, and it took me a little bit of time to get my head around that. But when you consider that amount is actually 350% less than what domestic customers are paying, that didn't come out in the NERA report. So clearly, what's gone wrong here is that it's unfairness on a grand scale. There's been 2 or 3 MHKs have took a great interest in this, but the vast majority of them actually haven't. In actual fact, when question times come up relating to gas, only in the last 6, 7, 8 months have most of them actually even sort of stood up and actually asked a question on it. And the real problem with this now, Paul, is that, you know, we are in a recession. People like me that are self-employed quite literally have got businesses that are closed down, and I'm actually worse than that right now because I'm trying to survive on £83 a week incapacity benefit from the Isle of Man government. Times are getting really tough, you know. When Manx Gas promised these refunds, rebates, we haven't had them. They've not been paid out. I've not heard anything more about them. We now don't even know, because we're now into 2021, whether or not any rebates will be paid out for 2020. So it is a real sweeping statement, but the game's over now, you know. The game is up. The time's up. You know, I would hope that this will be the last. I like chatting to you. You know, I think it's you know, you run a great service there, Paul. I mean, I genuinely do. But I'd like to get my teeth into something else now instead of still kind of going on about gas some 5 or 6 years later than when I first got involved in it. You know, it's a democratic disgrace, and I do hope the governor's watching, because I am actually now on at the point where I think it's nearly time that I did sit down, type out a letter and send it to the governor, because there's an element of Tynwald Hill, maybe
on Tynwald Day, a grievance.
I hope I'm off my crutches by then. Could be difficult making my way up the hill right now.
I should point out you had a slip a few weeks ago. You're, as you say, you're on disability at the minute. You can't do anything almost. No,
it's difficult, bad times at the minute. Yeah, but my wife Caroline's looking after me, and publicly, thank you very much, Caroline. I really appreciate everything you've done. It's been tough, Paul. It really has been tough. But you know what? Getting back to this, I think we've covered it all. As I say, the most important thing really is for all members to keep an eye on the House of Keys virtual sitting at the end of this month. There's some real juicy stuff about to come out, and you know. And so we look forward to that.
And once again, I invite the owners of Manx Gas, who have been with us once before, to come back again, the new man in charge, to talk about this. Probably going to say to you, of course, that everything's in hand and it's all moving along, so we don't want to make any statements, I suppose. But you're right, at the end of the day, they did promise us some rebates in this year, and the year is underway, and the clock is ticking, as they say, and still no signs. I haven't had a letter anyway, certainly. Maybe someone out there has had a letter, but as far as we know, there's nothing yet in place.
The wording was, Paul, the proposed deal is good news for customers, and we very much hope it is given the green light by Tynwald. Under the proposal, natural gas domestic and small business customers would get an average refund of £93 on their 2020 bill, a cut of 13.7%. Where is it?
Okay, and I should just, for clarity, point out we don't know the operating cost. You say the government's very near the operating cost, so obviously that's something that probably we don't know about, do we? That exactly what they operate at. But again, any more news on that and information would be interesting to know. But certainly the government do get a great deal. That's certainly come out of this over the last month or two, hasn't it?
Well, what we do know is that when MHK Chris Robertshaw spoke with you, he said it very clearly. He was going to go off and he was going to do further investigations on this. You know, maybe the time is you know, for Mr. Robertshaw to come back and do another interview with you and see what he's found, and then discuss it further. I'm going to be very clear again. One thing, because you're probably going to want to tie this up fairly soon. I've been very clear since day one, voluntary agreement is not going to work. Voluntary agreement is going to be a very, very bad deal for gas consumers. And whilst I do understand many of them will be looking forward to getting a £93 rebate, for the longer term, there's only one solution here. We need to go down the imposed regulatory route with full powers of a regulator to give consumers some strength and muscle back. That's my opinion on it, Paul.